Welcome to the Authority File. I'm Bill Mickey, your host and the editorial director at Choice. My guest for this series is Dr. Sarah Elaine Eaton. Sarah is the editor of a new book series from Springer Nature called Ethics and Integrity in Educational Contexts. Her first volume, Academic Integrity in Canada, which she co-edited with Julia Christensen Hughes, is out now. She's also the editor-in-chief of the International Journal for Educational Integrity and a faculty member at the Workland School of Education at the University of Calgary. Now, you might hear educational ethics and integrity and think, yeah, we could use some of that, or where do we even start? But we're actually talking about a field of study, one that is multidisciplinary and has lately extended quite far beyond its traditional and more narrow academic integrity days. And that's what Sarah is here to talk about. We'll be looking at how the field of study has advanced to include global perspectives on not just student behavior, but instruction, academic leadership, technology, and, importantly, equity. This four-part series is brought to you with support from Springer Nature. In this final episode of our series, we zoom out on educational ethics for a global perspective on policy and governance. We'll also talk about how librarians are uniquely positioned to provide services in support of these efforts. Can you give us a global perspective of educational integrity? How do various countries compare in their approaches to policy and governance?
This is a great question. And I say there are lots of us who are working internationally and connecting across borders to understand exactly that question. And in countries like Australia and the UK and Ireland, one of the things that we see is they have national quality assurance bodies for higher education. So in Australia, it's TEXA. In the UK, it's the QAA. In Ireland, it's the QQI. In Canada, in the United States, we don't have a national quality assurance body. In the US, this is monitored at a state level. In Canada, it's monitored at a provincial or regional level. And so not having these national bodies take a stance on quality assurance or advocate against contract cheating puts us at a disadvantage because, we talked about the countries that have legislation against contract cheating. Well, the countries that have legislation against contract cheating are those where they have national quality assurance. So these are some of the differences between and among countries. Those are mostly English-speaking countries, but we've also seen non-English-speaking countries perk up, particularly during the pandemic. And I'm now working with colleagues in Europe through the European Network on Academic Integrity and a global policy working group to understand how policy impacts students, because we know that student mobility and faculty mobility are still part of our reality, and having a better understanding of how these different issues play out across the world is really important.
Mm-hmm. So then how do you, that raises a follow-up question for me. So the communication between countries and regions in terms of policy and governance, how are you linking up to sort of share ideas or even create policy that might, where it makes sense, span across countries or regions?
I think one of the best examples I could share is the Irish National Academic Integrity Network has released a common lexicon for academic integrity. So, for example, they've defined plagiarism for Ireland, which means that all universities and colleges across Ireland would deal with the same definition of plagiarism. And here in Canada, I did a comparative study a few years ago looking at definitions of plagiarism at 20 Canadian universities, and they were all different. We had no consistency, and we think we all know what it means. And we're all talking about the same thing when we say the word plagiarism. And when you dig into policies, you find, oh my goodness, we are not talking about the same thing at all. So, for example, a school might include computer code under its plagiarism policy or musical composition. And another school might say, no, it's only based on prose or text. So not having common definitions across institutions is really problematic. I think in terms of policy, this would be like if we could get all of the, universities in a state, in a country, or in a province, in my case, to agree on what are common definitions we can use, that would be a great starting point. But I think it's also a long way off.
Yeah. Oh, what are the hurdles there? Just
I think, when you get folks in a room and, say, okay, how would you like to define plagiarism? Well, that's a conversation that could take several months in and of itself. I think now that Ireland's defined this for their country, we've got a great example that we could look to because they did it fairly quickly, which is amazing. They've been doing great work over there in the past several years. But I think that's one of the hurdles for sure. And then even, digging into how would this play out? So what does plagiarism look like in, like, say, an English lit class as opposed to a computer coding class, those sorts of things. But once we get that, I think it will change what we do because it will sort of give us an even playing field for students and faculty as they go from one institution to another.
Okay, excellent. So UNESCO's International Day of Education is coming up on January 24th, which champions education as a human right and key to sustainable development. How do educational ethics and integrity relate to these principles? What is the field's connection to helping promote the accessibility of education?
I think for me, a key question here is we can't have integrity without equity and without accessibility. I mean, the word integrity means to make whole. We get it from the same Latin root as we get to integrate. So we need to think about students as whole people, complete people, rather than only thinking about how do we catch the cheaters or punish misconduct, and what opportunities can we create for students to learn and practice ethical decision making as part of their ongoing education. We can start that from a young age, and then we can continue to reinforce those skills and understandings of ethics and integrity, whether children are in primary, secondary, or post-secondary education. So there's a lot of opportunities here. And with regards to sustainable development, we know that academic integrity in the classroom is the foundation for ethical decision making in life. And so we know that the skills that students learn around academic integrity, they will take with them beyond the classroom. And I think that's a key message.
Excellent. Yeah. Um, and then, given our audience of listeners of the Authority File, what would you say is the librarian's role in educational ethics? What are the supports, services, and guidance they can provide to students, and how are they uniquely positioned to provide these?
Oh, I think librarians are the unsung heroes of academic integrity. And libraries themselves can serve as a hub for academic integrity and educational ethics on campus, right? Not only because, I mean, traditionally libraries are intellectually agnostic and judgment free when folks walk through the door. And then that way the students can have safe conversations with librarians and library staff about how to cite, how to reference, but also librarians can go beyond that to talk with students about things like contract cheating and through things like digital citizenship and understanding the perils of connecting with contract cheating companies. I think librarians play a huge role, not only for skills training, but also helping students become advocates and agents of their own learning and help them build themselves up as learners and human beings. So I think librarians are actually critical, and more funding needs to go to library programs for academic integrity.
Hmm. So, what would you see happening there if there was funding provided for that? What would librarians kind of develop, services or instructional services around academic integrity, and who would they partner with on campus to sort of make that happen?
So I can give you an example from my own university at the University of Calgary. We have librarians that partner with the Student Success Center to deliver workshops
Mm,
around academic integrity, not only for citing and referencing, but also paraphrasing and other skills around this. So skills based training for sure.
yep.
And also awareness campaigns. So for our Integrity Week that we host on campus in the third week of October, our librarians are key champions of that. They host events in the library. They have student contests and trivia contests. They have a prize wheel that they spin when students can answer a question related to academic integrity, and they hold events in the library,
Hmm.
which makes this a real hub of academic integrity where students can go and ask questions, get information. So can profs, by the way. They write their LibGuides. I know that there have been some librarians in Canada who've been really active around writing LibGuides for how to cite and reference, for example, Indigenous knowledge keepers and elders.
Right.
There's so much librarians can do. Of course, they need the time and resources and support to do it, but librarians are a key champion of this work.
Excellent. Thank you for that. In their academic careers, students may cheat or plagiarize, whether intentionally or not, and graduate none the wiser or without consequence. Can you talk about the ramifications of not addressing educational ethics and integrity? Why is it so important to address the many issues within the large scope of educational ethics and integrity?
I think, when students graduate from our institutions, we want to know that they've earned their credential, and their
Hmm.
employers want to know that they've earned their credential, right? You don't want to go into the office of a medical doctor and then know that that medical doctor has cheated their way through med school. You don't want that person treating you. And the same with
Hmm.
engineers. You want to know that the engineers have actually gone through their courses and they know how to build the bridge that you'll be driving your car across. So not attending to these issues in school can have long-term important and sometimes even devastating consequences if people go out in the field afterwards and they haven't actually earned the credentials that they hold. And those credentials are meant to symbolize the learning that's occurred. And that led up to the credential being awarded. It's not just an end product, but the process that leads up to it is really key. And so I think as we're thinking about this whole topic of educational integrity and ethics and seeing this as this foundation for ethical decision making is really key because it spans all disciplines. Of course, medicine and engineering are two obvious ones, but it can also apply to things like trades. We want to know that the person installing the hot water heater in your home, doesn't blow up your house. Those kinds of things. We need to know that people are making ethical and good decisions in any profession that they go into.
Hmm. Well, even in the humanities, I mean, history, for example, which the lack of historical knowledge we've seen play out in here in America recently, in unfortunate ways.
Yeah, it's true. And who writes history and what are ethical decisions that are made with regards to how history is written,
Right.
rewritten, covered up, all of those. Yeah, you're
Hmm.
right. I think that's a great example from the humanities for sure.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, well, Sarah, that's all the time we have. Thank you so much for joining us on the program.
Thanks so much for having me. It's been a pleasure.
You just heard from Dr. Sarah Elaine Eaton. Sarah is the editor of a new book series from Springer Nature called Ethics and Integrity in Educational Contexts. Her first volume, Academic Integrity in Canada, which she co-edited with Julia Christensen Hughes, is out now. She's also the editor-in-chief of the International Journal for Educational Integrity and a faculty member at the Workland School of Education at the University of Calgary. This 4-part series is brought to you with support from Springer Nature. If you like what you hear, rate us or give us a review on your podcast platform of choice. As always, sponsorship and advertising for the Authority File podcast are handled by Choice's advertising manager, Pam Marino, and all of our episodes are produced and edited by Choice's digital media producer, Sabrina Kofer. That's all for this week. Thanks for joining us.